Welcome to our Family Talk video supporting trans students. I'm your host, Rebecca Downing. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Parent Initiatives here at Colgate. We're here today to talk about the resources that Colgate has in place to support our trans students and the things that parents, family members, guardians, and other caregivers can do to support a trans individual. I'm really thrilled today to have three guests joining me for our conversation. Lyosha Gorshkov, who is in my top right, is Director of LGBTQ Initiatives here at Colgate. Hi, Lyosha.
Hello.
Karen Fuller is a family peer advocate at ACR Health's Q Center in Syracuse, New York, as well as the parent of a trans individual. Deborah Conrad, hi Deborah. And Deborah Conrad is also the parent of a trans individual and a professor at another New York State higher education institution. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, and hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm glad to have you all here. So let's start with a few basic definitions just to make sure that our viewers can be on the same page with us as they take in our discussion. Karen, can you just briefly describe what do we mean by trans students?
Okay, so the word transgender can be used as an umbrella term for the community of individuals that their sex assigned at birth do not align with their gender identity. So it could be used as an umbrella term, or it could be used to describe an individual that is in that process of transitioning, from whatever their sex assigned at birth was to where their gender identity is. So there are other terms that we use. Gender expansive is a newer term that is an umbrella term also to be more inclusive of other gender identities as well, like non-binary, genderqueer, or gender fluid and things like that. So a good way to talk about the community would be trans and gender expansive to be more inclusive. But when we're talking about trans students, we're talking about students who are, either transitioning from one end of the binary, from where they were assigned at birth, to the other end of the binary, or someplace in between.
Great, thank you. And I'm wondering, Lyosha, if you could just define any particular terms that we use on the Colgate campus that might be unfamiliar to family members.
We use very expensively, we use trans with asterisk. So that's what the students started using, and they include an asterisk because sometimes trans, it's not only about, yes, it's when your gender identity expression does not align with the sex assigned at birth, but at the same time, it's also sometimes does not align with any binary. So that's why they include, for example, now trans advocacy group, which was formed in the bylaws that says it's all trans with asterisk gender non-conforming non-binary people, because there could be the question of identity. We also use the abbreviation, of course, and we use very in the office it's LGBTQ+, but in other forms we add more letters because some of them not represented here. But trans, we rarely use transgender. We use transgender is more in the academic or professional training settings, but in the casual language, trans is a very, let's say, accessible and very utilized by the students themselves.
Great, thank you. So for families who have a trans student who's either about to start as a student at Colgate or maybe who is already here on campus, what should their families and caregivers be aware of? In other words, what kinds of things might a trans individual go through or challenges that they might face when they are at college? Maybe we could start with you, Lyosha, and then Deb or Karen, please do chime in to our conversation here.
That's a great question because for my time being here, I've had already a couple of situations with, let's say, challenges with parents, and when kids come and they have not thought yet in higher school or high school and the school in general about their identity, and they just started coming to the terms because they see more diversity, which is very interesting, right? Because in the setting we are in, to see diversity within campus is very peculiar. But they, especially because it's age, because they didn't have any tools, they were not supported by the families. Families did not talk about any diversity or sexualities in their setting. So what I see, they go through the very interesting, difficult, exciting, euphoric / traumatic experience finding themselves, because they started thinking about them being transgender or being gender non-conforming. And sometimes it doesn't go well with the parents. Sometimes parents on the defense line, because parents might be from the particular area or without that knowledge about. And also, I guess it comes what I've encountered from the anger towards themselves. The parents angry at themselves, and that anger projects on the child, and child comes to the very difficult situation, especially when the parents pay for the tuition. Sometimes it's financial blackmail. They said, if you're going to proceed that, we're going to withdraw our financial support. It happens here. Or unfortunately, it could be ideation from the student, because students do not have those answers, because they just started that, let's say, journey to find their true identity and be authentic themselves. But also we have the groups, and that's a very good resource for them when they see other people who identify within the spectrum, outside the spectrum. But sadly enough, trans people are not well connected here, because by the virtue of their identity, by the virtue of their struggle they're going through, it's absolutely different from queer people or gay people or bisexual people, or because it's also access to the healthcare, access to clothing. That's what another struggle they have, because here they try to put something which will match their gender identity expression, but they cannot go with that back home, because in home it's more like binary structure. So there is a finding themselves, trying to deal with that in also in the mixture of the very high intense academic scrutiny, right? To be in that intense rigorous academic institution, and trying to find the role models, and trying to find within the rural areas of New York some infrastructure which virtually does not exist in the town but exists on campus. So there's multiple things we try to address, and of course we trying to encourage students to talk to their parents in the capacity they know better their parents. Sometimes parents not very pleased with the office, because they think we overstepping the barrier, because we kids come to me, for example, and they do not have other resources on campus sometimes, and I talk to them and refer them to, and some parents get very frustrated because it's not them, and they angry, they hateful, they full of that irrational fear. They do not talk to their child, but also angry with us because we're trying to help their child. You know, I mean, it's a very peculiar situation, but happily enough, we have now more and more resources, like with the Q Center, ICR, or our health center started prescribing hormonal therapy to students. So, and also expanding the sources and resources through educational programs.
So it's interesting. Yes. So it's interesting, Lyosha, that you brought up the point about the socialization of trans youth in college, because I think that this is one of the more important variable in them finding themselves and also being successful. That peer group interaction is very important, but it poses a challenge in other areas. For example, they may experience pressure to conform in that setting. They may have limited experiences or opportunities in clubs, in organization, in athletic areas. They may also try to seek help in areas where they may need medical assistance, as well as support from their Student Success Center. There is a hesitancy in some areas because of the interaction that they may feel going to those offices. And so because it's a challenge, parents need to be aware so that they can encourage and talk through these things with their trans youth. And I'm sharing this because my trans youth just came out in her final year of college, and so was quite familiar with the structure, the format of things. But when it came to that, there was those experiences, especially when they were looking for medical assistance and had to go through the health center, the services offered. Sometimes it can be limiting. So that parents must be aware of that and in some way try to see how they can assist and talk through some of those things that will be a challenge for their trans youth.
Thank you so much, Deb. Karen, I saw you nodding your head a couple of times too. Do you have anything to add there?
Well, first, I wanted to say too, so sometimes it's more fear driven with parents, that their response might be negative. We all love our child and we want what's best, right? And a lot of times when youth first come out, no matter what age, a lot of times, as a parent, you're faced with all these questions, right, that fill your head. So will they be happy? Will they be safe? Will they be successful? And for a lot of people, that initial response is, no way, not my child, not my house, this isn't happening. And I think that there's even more concern the older the youth is, right? Because there's a lot of life already lived that now things change, so for the parents, I think it's harder, to process through that. They've raised this kid, they're, for 21 years one way, and now the youth is saying, that's not me, so I think that takes some time, but definitely, so I do see that's part of the problem. Not a problem, but that's one of the causes of maybe some rejection. And two, I think a lot of, not understanding, what this all means. And that can, unfortunately, when that resistance is there, can also put a divide. So they're not willing to talk to their child more. They just want to close it out. Right. And then you get things like them maybe, putting conditions. So like, I'm not going to pay for your tuition then if this is what's going to happen, so yeah.
So I guess go ahead. I'm sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
Sorry about that, but I think I cannot help but underscore what Karen shared here about parents and their fears. As parents, we want a lot of certainty and stability and consistency in our lives with our children. We always see them becoming. And when this experience occurs, you are stumped. You are really taken aback by all of this. And you now have to deal with those emotions and those fears and those questions. And much of our rigidity comes from our anxiety. So we have to truly understand that often that anxiety is the thing that causes us to respond to our trans youth in ways that are not supportive or encouraging. And I know, of course, we can talk about that as we continue the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. And I think what I'm wondering is, for families where maybe this is a new experience, where their student has just come out to them, what's a way into a conversation that can be helpful or to build some understanding and to, foster the relationship, keep the bridges going together? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one of the first things is when, your youth comes out to you, what does that mean to you? Tell me more about that, right? So immediately starting with opening that line of communication, finding out more of what that means. So if they do come out as trans, okay, well, what does that mean for you? What are you thinking of for your future? What does this transition look like for you, because it varies by individuals. But then the parent has to do some work. So it's not just talking to the youth and having that conversation and keeping those conversations going. It's also doing some research on their own. So, looking up, there's tons of books. There are different websites with information. There's, different videos and documentaries out there. So getting educated and coming to an understanding of what, the transition process might look like, right? Sometimes just knowing what overall, even though it's different for everybody, but what it might be can help kind of calm some of those fears that families have initially, having a better understanding of what might be coming down the road. And then finding the supports for themselves, right? So a lot of times parents are thinking of their kid and finding supports for them, finding resources for them, but they also should think about themselves too, right? So finding support for yourself, finding either others to talk to, like in parent support groups, or, reaching out to like a family therapist that understand gender identity. And then, of course, working with the youth on helping them meet those goals. So, of course, depending on the age, there might not be much involvement, but just being there and helping to affirm them, and helping to make connections, that are needed, maybe connecting them or helping them find doctors or looking up, different therapists and stuff like that.
Are there common things that family members might sometimes say or do that they mean to be helpful, but could actually be hurtful or harmful?
I think a lot of times, and again, it varies by age, but I mean, when the youth are older, I think there's this, maybe thinking that, well, you can just wait, or why do you have to change something? Why do you have to make this change? Or can't you just, keep going as you were, or they hear their child come out and they're like, okay, thank you for telling me. And they start off okay, but then they don't continue that conversation. They don't find out more. So they're not really, they're not really showing that they are supportive. Another thing might be not using the correct name, using the chosen name, or using the, correct pronouns. Or sometimes parents will kind of out their youth to others when, they haven't, the youth themselves haven't, announced or been out openly to everybody. But sometimes parents are just kind of eager, and they'll share that. So maybe, again, that's part of that conversation that needs to be had, like, who should know and who should not know. So I think, I think that's all I have.
So in terms of hurtful or harmful things, I do recall struggling a lot with the pronouns, and also identifying my trans youth by the name that they selected, because as parents, we become attached to a lot of connections we have made with that youth who we have seen from childhood to adolescence to young adult. And the college years are years in which there is so much more of them becoming stronger in their identity. And it's important as parents and family members that we seek to understand they are struggling as well as we are. But the important thing about this experience is recognizing that you are not alone in this with your trans youth. As Karen shared with us, there are resources out there. But to be truthful, when you are thinking about those things and experiencing, what you're experiencing, you can't think about resources. You don't want to because you do not want to accept what is evident in front of your eyes. Mm-hmm. But I think you miss out on the joy of this person who is becoming, who has been so brave enough to share who they are and who they were all the time, that if you neglect to experience that moment, you would have missed out on a very important part of their lives and your lives as well. So for me, when I recognized that I was struggling, I reached out to the resources that I had locally. And that is how I was connected with Karen. And being in that support group and hearing other parents talk about their experiences was something that I think was life-changing for me. It helped me to recognize that I was not alone, because there's this feeling of aloneness. And as parents shared, you recognize that there were some questions you needed to ask yourself, as well as your trans youth. And you have to step out there because you do not want to lose that person who has become such an important part of your life. So for parents out there, I would say to be sure, don't let what you're experiencing limit you from reaching out to the resources that are out there. Do your research, read, try to understand, ask questions. It's very important. And find out from that person how they would like you to move forward in strengthening that relationship. I can tell you my trans youth and I have a very, very special relationship today. And I can tell you it's just barely a year that this experience has evolved. And when I mess up, they are willing to correct me. They are patient with me. And remember that the other significant adults in their lives are taking cues from you. So if you resist and if you begin to engage in microaggression, if you engage in ageism, saying, well, maybe they will grow out of it, or why think about it at this point, they are also going to feed on those things. So being positive, being supportive, being caring and endorsing that you love that person would go a very, very long way in turning those harmful or hurtful moments into experiences that they can celebrate when they're away from you.
Yeah, I also think what is very important, and you mentioned, so there is different situations, and sometimes the youth also impatient, and we can understand that, and that's what very important for students out there, that they can educate their families. They know their families better. Sometimes there are situations you cannot, in all logical and by any reasons, to send the youth back to the family. So we've had that situations, and we will try to not or avert that. But also sometimes youth, because they do not have that validation and they give up on the family, or they should be learning themselves, right? Yeah, we have to all learn ourselves, but at the same time, being patient with parents, it's very important as well. That's what, when you're 18 years old, you don't understand. And I remember that coming out myself. So, you do not care, because at that moment of life, you're so angry with the world in the puberty and everything at 17, let's say, right? Or 18. And you believe that it's not the business of your parents. So, and it's a very problematic statement. That's why we're trying to work with students as well to be patient and to provide some information, because sometimes parents do not know, as you all described, where to go to if they do not have resources like Q Center or locally. And we have the situations like in Hamilton, we don't have any resources, that some parents have to travel to Q Center, to Syracuse, taking 1 hour. That's why it's great we started that here. But students also need to find some grace within and some patience, and being that resource, the first channel of information, because you cannot guess So, and sometimes it could also fluctuate. So if they already affirm their gender identity, it could be sexuality, which could be fluctuating. It could be a lot of, so they do not know, especially if they started taking hormones or estrogen, their body changes and body sends different. And that's why parents also do not have to freak out, because sometimes they might say, I'm trans, but I'm also trans man and I'm trans and gay, or I'm trans man and I'm lesbian. So there is so many things. It should not scare people, because it's how they experimenting with their sexuality. And because sometimes also the pattern is it's only trans men and trans women. And it should be also the preconception, even on campus, exists among the straight population, that all trans people go through the gender affirming surgery, right? Or through the transition. But that's what we're trying to dismantle as well. And some trans students, they also affected by the prejudice, and they think that it's the only way, and we have to work with them as well too. So there is so many learning curves, and I'm not saying it's easy, not easy, it's a complex, and that's complex and I always say that parents, we all learn throughout life, and that's another learning experience for us. And especially if all of us who have children, I don't have children, right? But I understand that if you love your child regardless, right? So, and mistakes are okay. So we all make mistakes, we all mess up, we all misgender sometimes, not by means, but if we correct ourselves or find that moment. And I guess it's joyful and fruitful, and it's absolute happiness to see when child or student comes to and says that that euphoric because they finally found themselves what they could not find a year ago, and finally they see that answer why they were not social, for example, because social anxiety also on the spectrum, the isolation, the fear of starting a relationship because they perceive that if I tell someone and I don't know yet who I want to be with. So there is so many, and especially in the small, what I notice on campus as well as for LGBTQ plus population, trans population particularly, the social isolation and isolation not to be involved in the relationship or emotional experiences, right? Because of that fear and sometimes coming from that notion that you have to be certain who you want to be with. So that's what a lot of work on both sides. So I just don't want to put everything on parents. It also should be on the kid, especially if you're already in the age when you're more understanding your body and more understanding your sexuality, more understanding what you want to do. And you already have some acquaintances or peers or connections here. And I also want to see parents sometimes in different events and invite them, but I know it's a very slippery slope. It's a very fragile ice here to walk on.
Thanks so much. We've talked about families for whom this may be a whole new experience. Lyosha, could you also just briefly talk about, there may be families whose students are coming here, they've been out as trans for a long time, and they're wondering, what's the culture and the community going to be like for them at Colgate? Can you just talk a little bit about how a student is coming to school, knowing who they are and how they get connected, where they go, who they talk to, what kind of resources are in place for them?
That's a great question, because yes, I've had already some encounters with students and they already now in sophomore, junior. So they came already with a huge support from the families. So they came from the families who might not, and it took them also to educate them when they were in high school, but they already came here with the very strong sense of support on behalf of their family. And interestingly enough, when they came, they could not find the same support because it's very hard for any kid who grew up within the domestic environment, sheltered within the particular meals, the particular communication in interactions to come. It's a scary path to come to the middle of everything in Hamilton, New York, to come to that world from opposite side of the United States or from Midwest, and it's a fear of them because, okay, I'm accepted by my parents, but I don't know if I'm going to be accepted as a trans person here because I have not been connected yet to anyone. And that's what one of the students related to me. They even stopped hormonal therapy for some time here because they didn't know where to go to get, because they had some kind of reserve prescribed by the doctors from the place they are from, but they were not. And they thankfully they found the office, they found certain people who navigated them. But that's, I guess, the main concern of a lot of trans students, people of color, students who are LGBTQ plus, to come to the unusual place, are very not known and not yet explored as a community, and to experience that social isolation because they do not know, especially if you are put in the dorm. So you see, we have the very interesting process, the housing process has been evolving and has evolved throughout the years, and now we follow the application, because on application the students can place, for example, I'm trans identified, if they decide to disclose. So that student decided not to disclose that they trans, even they were supported, because they were afraid how it will be perceived by the committee, and they were placed in the men's. So we've shared with another roommate who was male, identified cisgender. So, and after a while, a couple of weeks later, they realized that they made a mistake not to put the identity. So we moved the students to, but it's not all the time the case, because sometimes the rest halls are packed because we have a huge enrollment, right? And to communicate that, so we need to also address, probably some parents might call and ask if we have this or that or this, or email, or attend webinars we have in April. But that's preliminary, what scares them. So what if infrastructure which I had in my hometown, within my family, is not going to be here? And it's a long process to develop those social skills of communication. And because sometimes, some youth is not very straightforward, as some people introverted, and they're afraid to ask. They're afraid, they're comfortable within the friend circle, but they're afraid to ask, and that could lead to a potential traumatic experience the first weeks on campus. But thankfully, now more and more students, before they come, they reach, and that, for example, trans advocacy group, which we have right now. So a couple of them already reached the president, and they were able to explain. But there is still certain challenges, and what we very take seriously, how we can improve the infrastructure, right, in terms of gender neutral showers, bathroom, lockers. So all of that, it's very important to address, and sometimes students themselves would say we need that, so we'll advocate for themselves.
So it sounds like there are ways for students to indicate coming in the door.
Because especially Pride Index,
for housing or other, that there is a way for them to do that.
There is, because on the application right now, when they enroll, and especially when they submit the housing application, there is a box about gender identity and expression. They also, what you prefer, who you prefer to share a room with, right? So what is your ideal roommate looks like. There's also, if they just started and want to go to Campus Pride Index. The Campus Pride Index is a nonprofit indicator how well campuses adjusted to LGBTQ plus, how they accommodate. There is all like res life, housing, policies, health insurance. So by all that means, and Colgate has its own portfolio. We submit reports every single year, or they ask, because the admissions has walk-in tours. They have also early birds, I guess we call it, webinars, when students who are not decided yet, but they already kind of enrolled, they can attend that webinar, and we usually bring other students from different groups, LGBTQ plus, who can answer better questions than we are, because we are detached from the social life of students. We know, we work with that, but we do not live here, right? So that's the connection. So there is some ways, absolutely, and sometimes they can reach directly the office, which they've done in the past.
Great. So shifting gears a little bit, I have a question about for families, maybe the first time a student's coming back home, for a break, middle of the semester or between semesters. what are ways that families can be supportive of their student coming back home, whether practical or more conceptual, but in terms of how to have a great visit back at home, and what students may need that's a little different than maybe the way things were when they left before they left home.
So I think preparing other members of your family, if there are others, is important. And to begin there is to find out from your trans youth, what are some of the things that they would appreciate the family doing that would help them to have a meaningful interaction and experience when they are away from the college environment, where they are supported, where they have resources, where they have their peer groups. I think also what can be helpful is just before that student arrive back home, to have a gift basket prepared with simple things. It might be a cup with their initial, the name that they have chosen, something that they can identify with from each member of the family, and a note, a letter, so that when they come home, they can have that gift basket made for them to show, their love, their respect, and their admiration for this new person that they are all adjusting to. There would be times when the family would mess up, but keep in mind, as Lucy said to us, that's part of growing, that's part of learning. And it's important to always find out from that youth how we can do better. One of the things I would encourage parents to do is to remember that there is an elevated mental health experience with our children. While they're on campus, they can get that, but when they're away, they may not be. So to ensure that that experience is continued for them, so as they are at home, they can interact with a health professional in one way or the other. I do know for my trans youth, I was intentional about looking for someone who could speak the language or understand where they were coming from. Just don't pick anyone. Do your research and ensure that this person may be able to empathize, or this person has the knowledge about trans issues that they can familiarize or have that conversation with the youth. But I think the starting point here is thinking of ways to strengthen that relationship, and also to find out what will be of most comfort to that trans youth when you know that they are coming home.
Thanks. Karen, any additional thoughts there?
No, I just think she did a great job. Other than, maybe practicing before they come home with their new name, with their new pronouns. Say the script in your head and just keep practicing, so that when they do come home and they're in front of you, maybe you won't have that many mistakes. I mean, mistakes happen, and that is fine. Always just, own that, correct it, apologize, and move on. But, the more you practice, the better. And a lot of people kind of don't realize how much you have to practice that, right? Practice makes perfect. So yeah, before they come home, I think spending time preparing in that way can be beneficial.
I also think what you need to always remember, because what I've noticed in some trans youth, so the lack of emotional affection, because some families constructed different how they express the emotions, right? How they express their affections, not necessarily within trans youth or LGBTQ plus kids, but that's what sometimes very necessarily for kids who identifying, coming out as LGBTIQ plus, as trans, particularly, to express that validation and to try to say more times that how you're proud that they've done a great job, because that's what my strategy as well when I meet with them, because sometimes they have lack of self-esteem, and they think it's not enough, and validation is the key, and validation that say, yeah, we're so proud that you've done that on your own, that you acknowledging that, and we absolutely. So that's some small, it seems to be small, but it's a very uplifting things. And if you're not very touchy, emotional person by virtue, and not all of us can be like, hugging, and even our own children, because there is some cultures involved, right? So my Soviet culture was very like, we love each other, but it's not to be always kissing and hugging. But hugs, it's a very effective way of affirmation and of expression, because I recently had those conversations with some students, and you can gather from that they longing that. So they're longing some, and they cannot find because they probably will not. And I know it's a lot to ask, but we have to be mindful about that as well, even if we do not understand at that point something, but still showing that it's still your kid, right? It's after that, it's your child. Child who you've been raising for 17 years, and child as a personality is still the same personality. So that's why I think it's very important. It's obvious things I can state, right? But sometimes we forget about them.
Yes, and it is those obvious things that are important, Lyosha, very, very important. And it's one of the reasons why I highlighted the gift basket, because it gives the other members of the family an opportunity to demonstrate love in a physical way, because they are not all what, as you say, might be wants to hug. But a simple note as I see you, or you're special to me, is a reminder that they have that family support. One of the areas too that I would share is the area of dress and clothing. You would well imagine that could be challenging as the youth comes back and is trying to identify more with the pronoun that they prefer or associate themselves with. I actually went shopping. That's what I did. I think selfishly, I wanted to, if this is the expression that you would like, this would complement you. I was genuine about it. I said, I'm not trying to make you into another me, but this will complement you. Because remember, they are adjusting to parts of themselves that they weren't accustomed to. And you are seeing that. In my case, my trans youth was becoming trans female. So it meant that there were some social graces and other things that were not natural. You've got to help there in one way or the other. And when I realized that they were struggling with clothing, I went out there and got a few pieces, because you can see, I can look at you, Lyosha, and say, okay, this will take you. I could look at Karen and say, that will take you, and you would look well in that. And similarly, you would have to do those things. And it doesn't mean that you're going to shop for a whole closet, but one or two pieces. And also find out, do you like this? How do you feel about that? Maybe the next time I would choose this. What color do you prefer mostly? And it really, really goes a long way in supporting that person. As you said, little things, but they mean the world to that individual.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And it brings me to the very interesting point that yes, you did the great, because some students who are also identified now as trans female, they struggle in how to, for example, to put makeup, because they want to do that. And we started doing those workshops to bring like trans identified hairstylists, because sometimes there is no support, they do not know, and they try to find that comfort in the cisgender female friends, right? But it's also very individual. Some of them very busy and they don't have that time. And it will be a great thing from the parental standpoint as well to show some tricks to encourage, because I guess that's also the huge validation when you offer that, even though they don't want to wear that. But when you offer that, knowing that they go in with this gender identity and expression, it will uplift them so much, and you can see happiness, because then they went and done nails in Syracuse. It was an amazing, and and they came and they show, and it was like, breaking my heart, because that's what they need sometimes. Tips, which I cannot be non-binary, but so I can put makeup on my own, but I cannot do on other people, right? Because I don't do it on a regular basis or something like that. And it's a very elevating experience to see them glowing and being happy. And sometimes the siblings who are more understanding also can do the great job to shop with them, or to go, because to go on your own to Syracuse Destiny Mall, being trans person, to shop for female clothing, it's a huge, huge, huge challenge.
Thank you so much for all the helpful information and insights that you've all shared. Is there anything that we didn't talk about yet that you just would like to briefly mention before we close?
So it's always something, because that topic could be going on, but I also want to just acknowledge that sometimes when you come on campus, for students, for example, when you let your students come to campus, try to encourage them to find the peer group, because there is a lot of ups and downs in that, and some social anxiety, especially coming after COVID and being a gay, reconnected, and it kind of isolated a lot of us. But there is certain, at Colgate, for example, we have those resources. We have people who identify within on the intersectionality, because sometimes, of course, being a trans youth from the white background, trans person of color is different, but we have different organizations, queer and trans people of color. We have trans advocacy group who is for everyone. We have Lambda, more tradition. We have a counseling center and some people who work with. We have my office. So, and we can connect them to different resources, and not afraid. I encourage parents also, if you have questions, to reach any of us, right? Because that's very important to start the conversation, because even though sometimes, and I received recently one very interesting voicemail, and I said to the youth, I'd rather prefer that your parent hates me than you, right? Because I am the person who is invisible, and you can get the anger, but after all, they got the courage to call, they got the courage to ask questions, they got the courage email those, because they process it. So that's why I'd rather ask than to assume, and we have professionals here, and we also can match students with other students from the senior or junior years who identify as trans, because sometimes it's very important for them to go through peer-to-peer. And of course, I cannot even begin to telling you how many students who are not yet found themselves, and they on that in between worlds. So it's a process, it's a work, but we all in that together, and we have a great resources, great panel today, right? And people who and personal experience inside what I find very, very, very touching other lives. Even when we did the webinar recently and the workshop with Karen and Victor, and I saw that some students came as well. So even it was mostly for parents and caregivers, but some students, and they told me afterwards that they even learned a lot about themselves. So that's why be on that side.
Right. One quick thought that I had, I'd like to share, because it was mentioned about the different, year groups as our trans youth transgress from being a sophomore to junior, senior, and they're home on longer breaks beyond their short winter break. They're there for the summer or even the holiday break. Many of them would be looking for opportunities for work. And this is a particularly challenging area for them. And I don't know what resources are out there, both for Karen and Lyosha. What might be some helpful tips in helping our trans youth navigate finding part-time jobs, how do they present themselves, and just how to navigate that outside community away from college. It is a challenge. And again, how can parents help? And this is where I think networking is important. Parents who know others who may have businesses or places and opportunities where their trans youth may find a job, because we want them to be independent as well. How can we assist there? What can we do that will help them, endorse their independence and do so in a way that has integrity, and we in no way make them feel that they are children. We have to do some things that might be meaningful moving forward, or think about things that would help these young people really find a space in the workplace and be comfortable being who they want to be.
That's a great point, Deborah, because we have the opportunities here at Colgate Summer Jobs, and if students want, they can apply for that, and we have multiple different choices. So they're gonna live here and work or research projects. Sometimes they can be teaching assistant, but on the global scale, it's very problematic for them to go somewhere and to find. That's why we're trying to. We've hosted with Career Services. We started that very great workshop, how to be successful, tips for success in the market, because we still know it's very cisgender and very gender presented in certain ways. That's why to grow network and to connect them to resources and to those people who work in nonprofit, for example, and in those professional settings, because sometimes they have the least of friendly employees, right? So it's a very challenging. It varies from state to state, from place to place, but we also can, of course, accommodate them if they want to apply for, because Colgate is more like flexible in that, and we are not gendered in terms of employment. But I agree, it's a more global question, how we can orient them to be successful in the bigger world, because there is sometimes should be a struggle with that, and with different preconceptions and notions exist. So, but we're working at least with our reach here, what we can do to equip them with that, and to find connections within the world which successfully presented this trans, for example, right? So that's why I've been talking to Career Services and to bring more and more motivational speakers or alums who are within the trans identities, which is not going to be a lot from alum standpoint, but we can bring all this from network, like even when they met Planned Parenthood, right? When they met with people from Q Center, so it's already kind of working towards establishing that professional connections. And I would love to see more, but it's a lot to take. And I really appreciate your question, because it makes me think more what else we can do here.
Fabulous. Well, that wraps it up for today. Really, really appreciate all three of you and your time and your insight, as I said before. Parents who have questions or concerns, you can always email me at parents@colgate.edu. I will get the question to Lyosha or to Karen or to Deborah or to any other department on campus that you might have a question about. So thank you all.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.